Thank you, Brent. Can y'all hear me OK? Yeah? OK. It sounds a little quiet here, but it's a big room. It's hard to tell. That was a great introduction. Thank you, Brent. So Brent touched on very nicely on the two things that I'm going to talk about today, and two things that I think go together in a way that not everyone realizes. And that is that the WordPress community is our greatest asset when we think about security. So throughout the time I've been involved with WordPress and talking about WordPress, I've gotten a lot of questions of people saying, but isn't it not secure? Or isn't it, my IT person says it's not secure enough. But I always argue that we are building the most secure platform on the web with WordPress, and that our community is the reason we're able to do that. So today I'm talking about WordPress security and how we're building that platform and what you can do to help. So if our community is our strongest asset and you are all part of that community, then it's important that you be involved in that process. Like Brent said, my name is Byrne. I'm the CEO of Clef. And it's going to be really hard for you to see. The bottom link is where the slides are. So it's getclef.com/WP security update. So I can tweet that out afterwards or something like that to make sure y'all get it. But Brent also mentioned Clef is a two-factor solution. It's a replacement for usernames and passwords. It's a better way to log into your WordPress site. It's what I spend my day working on when I'm not speaking at WordCamps or at meetups like this. So I don't have a demo planned, but perhaps I can do that afterwards if there's questions. Well, not part of my slides. So before I talk about what's happened in WordPress, I want to talk a little bit about a dynamic on the internet, the way internet security was done pre-platforms like WordPress. And it really was a separation between the haves and the have-nots. There were the big sites that were really important and had whole companies, teams of people behind them, protecting them, securing them. And then there were everyone else, everyone who's building a little site, personal site, and who didn't have the resources to protect themselves. So there was no sort of sense that you could protect yourself as a small site. You really were on your own, and you weren't able to do anything that big sites were able to do. So we had a dynamic where the big sites, which were getting most of the attacks, who were the most valuable targets, had built themselves perimeters. They had walls up, they had firewalls, they had IT teams defending themselves, and everyone else was out in the cold. This worked because most people weren't attacking little sites. There wasn't that much economic incentive. You couldn't make that much money off of attacking them. But it really was a situation where you weren't able to protect yourself. As the internet's grown and we've seen more small businesses coming online, as we've seen more people making their living from their websites, that's changed a lot. And platforms like WordPress have enabled that change. And the dynamic has shifted from the haves versus the have-nots to the solo versus community defense. So traditionally, it was who had security versus who didn't. Now it's who protects themselves versus who is a part of a community that is protecting itself. So how are we as a WordPress community circling the wagons when there's an attack and making sure that we're all safe? It's a really important shift, and it's been one of the major changes in internet security over the last 10 years. It's something that we've seen not just in WordPress, but across the internet. And WordPress's success, and it's the fact that it now powers more than 20% of the web, is one of the reasons why it's become the most secure platform. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is, what it is about our community that makes us stronger, and how the events of this year have shown that strength. So this year is a really important year for WordPress security in a lot of ways. There have been a couple of big news items about the security of our community and about the internet at large. So the three I'm going to talk about are Heartbleed, which I suspect most of y'all have heard about, Jetpack bug that was a pretty big news item a few months ago, and then the HTTP cookie bug, which had a brief little news flare-up, but which wasn't nearly as large as the other two. But I think they're all three really important to how we see security and how we as a community think about security. And so just before I sort of launch into them, the assets I'm going to talk about that we have are shared knowledge, our shared usage of the same platform, so our ability to share updates or corrections, and our ability to have so many people looking at the things we do, that when an error occurs, we find it quickly. So the first of those is communal knowledge, that we educate each other. This is an asset that a lot of people don't talk about, but which is incredibly, incredibly powerful. One of the things that WordPress does better than anyone else is talk to one another. We have meetups like this. We have WordCamps that are organized all over the country, all over the world. Some of the biggest are all over the world. And we also have an incredibly rich and thriving online community. So if you go on Twitter and you're looking for WordPress, there are hundreds of thousands of people talking about this all day. And there are news sites dedicated to covering this kind of stuff. And there are a lot of people who, in their blogs, talk about it, and when there's an issue, are willing to spread the good, like the new information. And so we see this incredibly quick dissemination of information. And that's what happened with Heartbleed. Heartbleed was an issue not with WordPress, but with OpenSSL, which is a fundamental building block of all online security. Almost every website was affected, Facebook, Twitter, everyone. But WordPress was able to react much more quickly than almost anyone else, especially in the small site side of things. And the reason we were able to do that isn't because we have the smartest security people in the world, although we have a lot of them. It wasn't because we have software that's perfect or because we missed OpenSSL, like that we weren't using it. We were. A lot of people were affected. But the reason we were able to respond so quickly, and the reason why WordPress did such a good job of this, is because we have a community that talks to one another. There are thousands, tens of thousands of blog posts about how you as a WordPress admin can fix your site to make sure you're not vulnerable to Heartbleed. It wasn't something that one person talked about. Automatic didn't put out one blog post that the whole community was supposed to learn from. It wasn't something that there was an update that could fix this, that everyone would automatically be fixed. But our community was the fastest to protect itself because we share good knowledge. When there's something that we all need to know, it spreads very quickly. And people listen to one another. And that community protected us in a really incredible way. And Heartbleed really was used very little, especially within WordPress. So we have this huge asset that we are able to share information, that when an exploit or a vulnerability or something goes wrong, and I think it's important to say that something always goes wrong. You know, there's no perfect software. No matter what you're working on, there will always be bugs. Security vulnerabilities are a part of life, no matter what you're working on. And so the important thing to think about is not how do we avoid them altogether, because we never will, but instead, how do we recover from them? How do we fix them? And Heartbleed showed how good we are as a community at fixing or at solving these sorts of problems. So the second thing is software distribution. That when you fix something on WordPress, you can fix it once and fix it for all of us. Now, that's not necessarily true every time. It's not something that we all use identical software. But it is true that we're all using something that's roughly the same. And so when something goes wrong, when there's a little bug, when something needs to be fixed, one update, one patch, can usually fix it for most of us, if not all of us. And that's a really interesting thing about both WordPress and our community, is this idea of abstracting away the things that we aren't good at. So you as a site owner, or you as a developer, don't touch every part of WordPress. Unless, I mean, some of you might. Some of you might actually touch every line of code, but it's unlikely. Most of us use what we need, and the rest isn't something we deal with on a day-to-day basis. But as a community, we're touching every part of the code. We're thinking about the ways to push the boundaries of every piece of WordPress. And that means when something breaks, there's someone to see it. And when they fix it, we all get the update. Even if I don't use a particular part of the theme editor, if I don't use a particular part of the admin in my day-to-day job or in my normal life, if someone else fixes something about it, we all get to benefit from that. And that benefit gets much bigger the bigger our community is. Right? The more people who are fixing little things, the more able we all are to benefit from those fixes. So it's a hugely important thing that we're able to distribute one piece of software to so many people, and distribute fixes in particular. So Jetpack had a bug It's a plugin that a lot of us use, one of the most popular plugins on WordPress, had a bug in their authorization process that could let someone bypass it. So a serious bug that affects a big piece of our community. But because automatic updates are enabled on so many sites, and because we as a community are so dedicated to protecting each other, we're able to roll out a fix that before anyone knew what had happened, before the bug had been announced, almost every WordPress site on the internet had been fixed. It was already solved. They didn't have to tell everyone how to fix it because they already knew how. And some of us turn off automatic updates because our site's more custom and we want to make sure something doesn't break. And so it's still important that in that situation we disseminate the knowledge and that we all talk about it, and that we also provide sort of the blog posts and the support that we saw at Heartbleed. But our ability to patch everyone at once, or almost everyone at once, is an incredible asset. So functionality that we all use is able to be shared across a huge range of sites. So this is another big, big part of why our community helps protect us. Because you, the other 20% of the internet besides your sites, may notice something is wrong that you don't notice. And when they do, your site's going to get better and get fixed for it. That's really powerful. And I'm going to talk more about automatic updates in a little bit, because that's been something that there's been controversy around. Some people have fought against automatic updates because they're worried about it breaking their site. But it really has been an incredible asset for security. So I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But the third sort of big item here is the discovery and correction of issues. And this is just the fact that we have so many eyes on all of our code, and we have so many eyes looking at every plugin. Everything that is a part of WordPress gets looked at, and someone's touching it, and someone's testing the limits. And there's someone who's trying to do with a piece of functionality something that's never been done before. And by pushing everything to its limits in a million, much more than a million, in hundreds of millions of sites, we get to see the edge cases. We get to see when it starts acting weird. And we get to see, like, hey, if you act this very weird way, you can get into a website you're not supposed to. And when one person notices it, we all get the benefit of it. And so having more people looking at what we do means we're more protected. And that's something that every developer team in the world wishes they had more people bug testing for them and more people looking for their errors. Because like I said, there's always going to be errors. There's always going to be bugs. So having a lot of people looking for them means they get found faster and fixed faster. And that's a huge, huge asset as well. So for this, I'm going to talk a little bit about HTTP cookies. And this yellow is really hard to read, and I apologize. It says HTTP cookies, and then there's a picture of cookies. And HTTP cookies, this was like a brief little flare-up where people talked about this bug. It was a pretty minor bug. It didn't make a huge, it's not a huge issue. But the way it was reported was a problem. So someone actually, Ars Technica wrote a blog post about this bug before Automatic had a chance to fix it. And that meant they had to scramble and try to get it all fixed and patched and updated in the wild before anyone could exploit it, before anyone could break into sites. And responsible disclosure is a really important topic. When we, all of the benefits of a community come when our community members act in the best interest of the community. So instead of trying to break into other people's sites when I find something wrong, I instead report it to the person who's in charge of it and help fix it. And in this case, someone published it before it was able to be fixed. But in general, so I should take a step back and say, we have to assume that not everyone acts in everyone's best interest. There are people who will do it wrong, both by mistake and on purpose. And there are people out there who are trying to break into our websites. But our ability as a group to find the issues faster helps us, and our ability to sort of educate each other, to explain what responsible disclosure is, what is expected of you, helps protect us even more and more. Sorry, I took a step back and now I stumbled a little bit there. But what what I'm going to say with this point is that if you find something wrong, if you get into a website and you're like, I didn't type a password, what happened there? If you're a security researcher and you see this stuff, it really is important that you disclose it responsibly, that you report it to, if it's Automatic that has the bug, Automatic, if it's WordPress.org, to the .org security team. And we have the resources available. Like we have everything in place so that you're able to do that. And so, yeah, the fact that we have more eyes on code helps us catch these faster, and disclosing them responsibly helps us fix them before they're a problem. So all of that, those three issues are all happened in 2014. This has been an incredibly loud year for WordPress security. 6 months in, and we've already had a lot of news about what's happening to our security. And a lot of that is sort of scary, and people talk about the issues. You know, Heartbleed may have been the best branded security vulnerability ever. Incredibly well done. Everyone knows about it. It was just like very loud and very scary. Because in general, in security, when we want people to change things, we have to scare them. We have to say like, oh, the internet is breaking and you're all doomed if you don't fix it, just so that people will go like make an update or listen to our advice. And that's a really negative trend. It's one thing that I try to fight a lot in the way I talk about security, because security isn't that scary. It also doesn't require you be that brilliant. It's really all about everyone having good habits and just constantly thinking a little bit about good habits. But we use fear to get people to act the way we want them to a lot in security. And so the way I think about this year is that it has been one of the strongest cases for why WordPress security is so good. That we have seen this year how incredible our community's ability to respond to problems is. And that the fact that we have not seen exploits in the wild, that instead we've seen really well-handled issues all through the year, has been a huge testament to our community and has sort of tested us, and we've succeeded. So I think that 2014 is going to be remembered as the year of WordPress security. I think that we will all look back on this as a year where we moved forward in giant leaps, and also where we proved to the world outside of WordPress that we're capable of standing up to even the hardest and most brutal of threats. When the whole internet is threatened, that WordPress responds best. That said, no. The next thing I want to talk about, though, is the rising threat, the next thing that's in front of us. So I've talked about 3 things that have happened this year and how well we responded to them. But the next thing that's coming is a zombie army. Some people call this a botnet. I find that to be a really jargony term that's hard to approach. So the zombie army is a group of websites and computers that have been infected. They've got a disease. And all they do is go out and look for brains. They try to eat other websites and infect them. And the zombie army changes the dynamics of online security drastically. Where it used to be that only the big websites were good targets, the zombie army will eat anyone, and they'll just make them another minion in the army. All they are looking for is more soldiers. And that means they're attacking everyone. Your site has probably been hit with login attempts. You get spam. You get sometimes denial of service attacks where someone tries to knock your site offline. It happens to even tiny sites. And the reason is because this army isn't smart. It's not like an intelligent attacker trying to make money off of one person. It's just this mass that is sort of roaming the internet looking for more followers. But this is where our community really shines. We have built some incredible tools into WordPress. And we have developed some really incredible defenses that protect us from the zombie army better than anyone else. And the truth is that the zombie army means big sites have to protect little sites too. No matter how big you are, this threat is growing if you're not protecting everyone. And so huddling together and making sure we are all defended is in everyone's best interest. And so the economics of security have changed. The whole model of how we think about protecting each other has to change. And WordPress is in the best position to do this. And that's why I think that this is going to be such a fundamental year in the way we think about security. So I talked about sort of the 3 big benefits we have, 3 of the reasons why we're so strong. But there are 3 tools I want to talk about that have recently been introduced in the community that have done a really good job of extending this. Just new tools that we're working on that make us even stronger and even better defended. The first is the password strength indicator. This is something that came in 3.8. And what it does is it just says when you're setting your password, it tells you whether it sucks or not. And if it does, it says you should make it stronger. It doesn't force you to do anything better, but it raises the base level of security. So instead of saying everyone has to be at the highest bar, it just says we all should know what the low bar is. We all should know that if your password is password, that's not good enough. And we're not going to force you to do anything differently. We're just going to let you know you are, as a part of our community, should be doing better. And this is something that we have to think about at every part of security, every part of the experience, is how can we make the lowest bar higher? Because the zombie army isn't going for the achievers. It's not going for the people who are researching this and spending all their time and money on it. It's going after the people who aren't paying attention, who aren't maintaining their sites well. And so we have to make sure that we educate them and make sure we're raising them up. And that's how we protect all of us. The second thing is distributed attack detection. That's a lot of big words. I should have changed that wording. That's awful. But this is like a kismet, right? So when you use a kismet and you're doing spam blocking, you've changed the way you block spam radically. So instead of saying like, hey, someone is spamming my blog, I'm going to stop them from spamming my blog, you're now saying, someone is spamming my blog, I'm going to stop them from spamming everyone's blog. And we all get to learn when someone's attacking on one site. So then one zombie can attack each of us once. Each zombie only gets to attack our network once. And that's really powerful. And there are tools. There's also Brute Protect that does this for logins. We see Cloudflare does this for denial of service. But we really have seen these tools that say we should all learn from each other. When we're getting hurt, we should make sure that everyone else knows who's hurting us. And that every person who defends themselves with these tools helps all of us. So each of our defenses gets much stronger with every new person who's a part of who's using the tool. The third, and this is something that's being worked on right now, sort of as a plug-in thing, is one-time passwords. So the current WordPress system uses XML-RPC as its API, which is a lot of letters. But basically, if you want to do two-factor, which is something we work on a lot, that's what I do every day, you have to turn off mobile apps, and you have to turn off things that want to connect once, because those things need a password to log into the website. And one-time passwords is something that's in the works that's going to make it so we can use two-factor much better. And it's a huge asset to our community, not because one person gets access to a better tool or because we, as a community, I'm sorry. It's not because one person gets access to the tool. It's because we all get a better baseline protection. All of our backdoors are a little bit tighter. And that's something that's a huge asset. The other one, and I promised to talk about this, and I thought it was going to be here, but I must have moved it, is automatic updates. So, oh, actually, I have it on another slide. That's why. How can you help? Cool. This is a better way to go. How can you help? So I've talked about how our community is protecting itself, how we all contribute to making WordPress safer. But you're a part of the community, and there are a couple of things you can do to make sure you contribute well. The first thing, and this is a smiley face putting on a mask on an airplane. It'll be more obvious in the next slide, but is protect yourself. So the best thing you can do is make sure your sites are safe, that you pay attention, that you are thinking about security at least a little bit If you're here, you've thought about it at least as long as I've been talking. So that's great work. I appreciate it a lot. Congratulations to all of you. The second thing you can do is pay it forward. So the thing is on planes, they say, put your mask on before helping those sitting next to you. Maybe I spend too much time on airplanes. But the next best thing you can do is make sure that your neighbor is protected. So when Heartbleed comes out, if you tweet about it, like you're helping pay that forward. You've learned something about security, and you're helping our community learn about it as well. If you write a blog post, that's even better. But any way you can spread security knowledge is helpful and important. So always knowing to protect yourself, make sure that you're doing things right, make sure your sites are safe, because it's your responsibility. And your site being safe helps the whole community. And then making sure you pay forward that knowledge. So pay attention, I said. The next thing is pushing for better defaults. So one of the things, so this is where I wanted to talk about automatic updates. Automatic updates are maybe the biggest change to WordPress security in recent memory. It's a huge, huge, huge benefit to all of our security, because unlike your websites, a lot of websites aren't actively maintained. A lot of people put together a site and then abandoned it. And it might just have their one blog post they wrote. It might be something that they still write blog posts on, but they've got an update counter up there that's in the thousands, and they just don't want to deal with it. It could be a whole number of things where they don't care about updating their site. And that's the majority. You know, a lot of us are really good about updating our sites, but most of us aren't. And those sites are the ones that are hurting all of us. The zombie army is made up of the people who aren't updating their site. And so for us to enable a tool that protects all of those, that protects people who aren't paying attention, is incredibly powerful and incredibly important. But there was a lot of community resistance. The people who are most active, who do keep their sites up to date, said, this will break my site when I'm not paying attention. And it turns out we built a really great system that checks to see if your site's broken and then rolls back if it did. And it does a really good job of that. And it doesn't break any sites anyway, because they're generally very small security fixes. But we also made an option to turn this off. You don't have to use WordPress Security or the automatic updates. If you're good about updating your site, then feel free to turn it off. And then when you are ready, because you're updating your site on your own, you can test it out and do it the way you like to. And that works. That's really great. But for most of users, we want this to be on. We want this to be protecting them. So better defaults is something we as a community have to stand behind. We have to say good security should be the default. You should opt out of good security. And that means that we're all going to be better protected. So pushing for better defaults is something that I think requires us think about our community instead of just ourselves. But it's a really easy leap to make once we've thought about it. So it may be annoying for you that once to turn off automatic updates. I'm sorry. But for the protection of all of us, for all of our good, it makes a huge, huge impact. And so better defaults are coming in a lot of different places. And right now, there's nothing contentious. I can't say there's this one issue I need you all to vote with me on. But I do think that this is going to keep being an issue, that security is always going to be something that's inconvenient at some point, right? We always are trying to protect people more than they want to actually be bothered. And I want you to remember that you are able to opt out. If this doesn't work for you, you can stop it. But for the vast majority of people, it's going to benefit. And so we really should be pushing for better defaults wherever we can. The last thing, and this has been on my slides, but the way I like to talk about the security through community is that we've built an infrastructure of care. And that's a really funny thing to think about, because so many people think of security as being so technical and being so much about being a genius who looks through code and doesn't make errors. But the truth is, security is about caring. It's about caring both to pay attention to what's going on and when something's up, and also about the other sites in your network, that the other people in your community are also protected. And WordPress has this incredible, incredible infrastructure of people who care. And most of them, the vast majority of them, aren't technical. Most people who think about this and write about this don't know every little detail about what's going wrong. And we're able to take something that's hard or complicated or very technical or specific, whatever line of code was wrong with Heartbleed, and translate it down and say, to people who are pretty technical, here's what went wrong. And the people who are pretty technical say, people who are not that technical, here's what went wrong. And the people who are not that technical learn and say, people who know nothing at all technically and who have never touched any of this stuff, here's what went wrong. And we're able to disseminate. And we're able to spread things really well. And it's because people care. It's because our community cares about this sort of stuff. And that infrastructure is incredibly valuable, and it's what keeps us so safe. So that's the WordPress security update. That's how 2014 is going so far, and why I think it's going to be one of the most important years of WordPress security. And I'm ready to take any questions if y'all have them. Thanks. That's a good question and a really hard one. So, what? Oh, yeah. So the question was, what plugins do you recommend for a WordPress site? And clearly, I work on WordPress security plugins, so I have an opinion. So there are two plugins that are sort of like all-in-one that just sort of like try to do everything. And it's the iTheme security plugin that used to be Better WP Security and WordFence. And they both do a really good job of sort of checking a lot of lists. I think that they, for a lot of people, that is a good way to sort of like blanketly do things. But it also gets in a lot of people's way. Like some people who customize websites heavily have problems with them. And they also sacrifice some specificity. So a while ago, I put together a resource called the WordPress Security Checklist. It's at getclef.com/WordPress-security-checklist. And it sort of goes through the recommendations of like when you build a new site, when you start something new, what are the things you need to do. And it has like a few plugins, but mostly sort of like what you should be doing so that you don't let a plugin do all of it. And that's, I think, a better option than me saying, like, listing off plugins that do everything. So yeah, I would say like the checklist is actually something I put together with a lot of other WordPress security people, so it's not like just my opinion, but it is a good starting point. So can you repeat the checklist? Yeah, so the URL is getclef.com/WordPress Security Checklist with dashes in between the words. If you search WordPress Security Checklist, it also comes up. Anything else? Yeah.
Hi, I'm really interested in this zombie army.
Yeah. I'm so glad. I've been trying to get people interested in this forever.
So what is WordPress doing to protect sites that are actively being attacked by the zombie army, and what is Clef doing to help WordPress in terms of proactively protecting these websites from being attacked?
Yeah, so WordPress itself is doing a couple of things. Security, automatic updates is the biggest thing that WordPress has done to protect our community from the zombie army of anything. Because the #1 thing that made new zombies was out-of-date WordPress. And so by keeping more people up to date, we do a better job of saving ourselves from zombies. Because the zombie, like one common zombie attack was like, hey, there was a security update. What was updated? Oh, there was something wrong. Let me go see which sites haven't updated, and I'll take advantage of that something wrong. And particularly with really old versions of WordPress, there were things that were wrong. And if you're still running version 2.1, like someone's going to be able to figure out what's been fixed since then. And so automatic updates is the biggest thing we've done. The password strength indicator is the other thing that's really been implemented to help keep all of our passwords stronger. The tools I mentioned that are sort of crowd defense tools, the Brute Protect is a great plugin that does crowd login defense. Cloudflare does the denial of service defense, and and spam filter was the third one. Specifically Clef, we're working on two-factor. We get rid of your passwords completely and make a safer login. Since login is the weakest point of any WordPress site, we've really focused on that. One of the things that people have tried to do, and one of the reasons why people have used fear as their security tactic for so long, is because people really hate passwords, and they have really bad habits with them. Like, so many people use password as their password, even when they know it's wrong, and like, they know it's like they would never do that. Like, I've talked to people who have been working in WordPress for 7, 8 years. They've built sites for some of the biggest companies, and they're like, oh, I would never do that. And then they hand off a site to a client, and they set the password to password. And the client gets the site, and they never know how to change the password. And so that site, like for a big important client, has admin password as its login forever. So the password strength indicator is a good improvement, but we think that there are ways to make login easier, like to make the habits really easy, and to make it stronger. And so that's what we work on. Cool. Anyone else? Yeah. Oh, I didn't repeat the question. I sort of repeated it as I went.
All right, so I have a question about what you were talking about with mobile and disposable passwords.
Right.
So I'm building a lot of sites now where there's a login component for people who come to visit, whether they're commenting or buying products or things like that. How is that going to help with people who are just using the site on mobile? Is that something that we would implement on our site? And how would that affect end users?
That's a good question. So the one-time passwords is really for if someone's logging into your WordPress admin or logging into WordPress. So if you're using WPMU or anything like that through this sort of standard WordPress login. Today, you can make that as strong as you want. But if you want a mobile app to connect, like the WordPress app, you have to give it your password, right? And it's always going to have access through that back door. And so if you really want strong, like two-factor, if you want to use something like Clef and be really protected, you have to turn off mobile apps connecting. And that's a bummer for a lot of people. They want to protect their site, but they also want to use the app on their phone. And so the one-time passwords let us do that. So the app on the phone can have the one-time password, which isn't going to be a vulnerability for getting through Clef. Yeah?
But would that affect like somebody who comes to the site who's like a shopping cart user, for example? They're not coming through the admin.
So it affects them in that the whole login system is stronger. Sorry, give me 1 second to think about the best way to phrase this. Also, the question was, how does the one-time password affect people who are coming to the site as visitors and logging in? How does it make the website safer for them? And the answer is that if anyone wants to be connecting through the API, through XML RPC, which a lot of plugins do, so Managed WP needs that access. The WordPress app needs that access. There are a lot of things that need the access. And if you want to use any of those tools, you have to leave it open right now. So you have to leave open your backdoor. And so one-time passwords lets you close it. Like lets that be gives us a safer way to access the API. So for most users, they won't see anything about it. So most people coming to your site would never see one-time passwords or think about them. But the whole login system is better protected because it exists. So anyone coming through the front door won't see that there are changes that we've made to protecting it, but their login system is still much safer. Does that answer your question?
I'll get more details later.
OK. Anyone else?
This is kind of a non-related question, but why are people so worried about security with the Internet of Things? Have you been thinking about that?
Yeah, so the question is, why are people so worried about the security of the Internet of Things? So it's a really good question. There are two answers. And it's two separate conversations that sometimes overlap. The first side is, with the Internet of Things, everything has to be talking to each other. And that presents a really hard challenge if you want to keep anything they say secret. So if everything is sending messages about itself all the time, and I want certain people to read those messages but other people not to, there's a really hard problem of how do we decide who gets to talk to who. So basically, when two people want to talk to each other, it's easy for us to make that safe. But if a million people want to talk to a million other people, but they can't, the connections are very specific, it's just a hard logistics problem. So say, for instance, that your bathroom wants to have some Internet of Things connected to it. And your phone, when you walk into the bathroom, should be able to pick up information and tell you something about your bathroom. But you don't want anyone else to know that information. It's hard for that information to go just to your phone as opposed to everyone's phone. And as there are more and more devices connected, there's more potential for something being sensitive and that you want only shared with the right person. And it becomes harder to figure out who the right person is. So the first one is logistical. The second is much more about privacy. So as more things talk to each other, there is greater chance for us to accidentally share things we didn't mean to. So during the Olympics in London, there were the trash cans put out on the streets. And our iPhones a lot of them try to connect to any Wi-Fi network they pass. So these trash cans pretended to be a Wi-Fi network, and when you walked past, they would notice you, and they could identify you. And if you walked along a route of the trash cans, they could figure out what your commute was. Where was home, where was work, which hotel were you staying at, which events were you attending. And it's all of a sudden a very creepy thing where maps of everywhere you walk were accessible to some advertising company. And they could figure out hey, they went to this store because they stopped between these two trash cans and then went back the other way. And so we should send them ads for that store. That creeps a lot of people out. That's sort of a problem. And as more things talk, there are more accidents like that can happen. The iPhone didn't mean to be sending out your location information, but because there are more connected devices, it's something we have to worry about. So it's really the accidental, my couch talking to me might be cool, but the fact that my downstairs neighbor now knows everything about my couch might end up being a problem. So the privacy side of it is one big concern. As more things talk, what does that reveal about us that we didn't realize it would? And the other side is, as more things talk, how do we make sure they're only talking to the right people? Anyone else?
Hey, I don't know what the percentage of the people that actually execute the automatic update is, but I was wondering if WordPress was actively going out to the big managed hosts, certain companies out there, to get them on board, because a lot of these guys aren't doing the automatic updates. Right.
So the question is WordPress going out to the big managed host and trying to convince them to do automatic updates? And the answer is yes. They are trying very hard. Nason is aggressively pursuing everyone not doing automatic updates today. For managed hosts, there are challenges around getting it right and doing it in a way that doesn't hurt your customers. And it's a process that's going to take them some time to adapt to. But it's something that, A, we as customers should be pushing them to do. We have to know that it's a priority, that we're protecting all of the sites in their network. And B, we have to be patient that it is hard, it's a real problem. Just because logistics, when you manage that many sites, it's hard to change anything.
You didn't mention I saw you mention the zombie army
Right.
And then there was the XML RPC issue.
Right.
That was out there still long ago.
So, I definitely didn't cover every vulnerability that's happened. These were just 3 that have made some of the biggest splashes. XML RPC also had an authentication thing. It's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about one-time passwords. But I chose these 3 just because I think they made sort of the biggest splash, and they're some of the ones that people are most scared about. There was a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt spread about them. But there have definitely been a bunch of other littler things.
So my question is regarding your comment about better defaults.
Absolutely.
So on the login screen, is it still possible to use admin and password when you create an account? I would think it's obvious then for better default, those 2 should be disallowed, either by plugin or by WordPress out of the box.
It is still allowed to use admin and password. And one of the reasons is that we don't want to be too heavy-handed, right? We don't want to babysit people. We just want to give them the right tools to protect themselves. I agree. If I was dictator of the world, all of you would be fingerprint scanning. No.
Well, security is often a trade-off. So what's the trade-off of letting people still be lazy or inattentive and leave themselves vulnerable?
Right. So the question is, does WordPress still let us use admin, password, and why? And the answer really is, there are a million combinations that are just as bad. You can use 1, 2, 3. You can use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there's a whole list of passwords that I would love to disallow and just be like, those aren't good enough. And we've started by saying, those are very, very weak. Change it to something different. But we haven't forced it yet. And so there's a library of the strengths, and that's what we use. Dropbox built it. It's actually called the bottom row of your keys. So it's Z, X, Y. It's impossible to pronounce. But I don't know of any plugins that have implemented it. So the question was, is there a plugin that'll do this if WordPress doesn't do it by default? There are definitely plugins that that require stronger passwords and require passwords be reset more often. But I couldn't tell you their names off the top of my head. If you search password strength, they come up. I haven't used them that much, so I couldn't vouch for their reliability. But I know people who use them. They seem to be, they're out there. Right. Yeah, I think that it's, again, we don't want to force people to do things that will make them angry at WordPress and say, get off my website. But it definitely feels like we should not let people use admin and password. Anyone else? Awesome. That's been great. This is a lot of fun. Thanks so much.